Let me show you something kind of neat here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shadow. Not a drop shadow, but a shadow, a real shadow. Let me show you how you do it. We're going to start here with this picture of a bottle and a glass, and it's already been separated from my background image. Well, how do I go about creating a shadow? Well, using layers, it's really easy. The first thing I do is I go into Layer Effects, and I create a drop shadow. Wait a minute, I said I didn't want to create a drop shadow. Well, this is just the starting point. So we do the drop shadow. And it doesn't make too much difference what we do with it right now, because I'm going to fine-tune it once I get it to where I need it. So I'm just going to say OK. Well, I can't even see the drop shadow because it's right behind the bottle. Well, what do? I'm going to come over to where it says Effects, or FX, on the bottle layer here, and I'm going to right-click on that. If you only have a one-button mouse, you're going to hold down your Control key and click on it, and come way down to the bottom where it says Create Layer. Once you create the layer, just say OK here. It's telling you that some of the layer effects can't be put on a separate layer, but the drop shadow can. There it is. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify that shadow so that it looks real. The first thing that I'm going to do, of course, is highlight the layer. Now I'm going to go over to my Edit menu, and I'm going to come down to Transform, and I'm going to come over here to Distort, right there. Okay, now I get my modification box and handles, and what I'm going to do here is just take the top middle one and bring it down, and then I'm going to move it over like that. All right. Now I can come back up here to the Edit menu again and go to Transform, and well, let's say I've already selected Distort. So what I can do here, let me just bring this down a little bit more, like that. Okay, and maybe even bring it back up like that a little bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over to the Edit menu, back to Transform again, and this time I'm going to say Perspective. Because when you have a shadow, well, it's going to kind of get wider as it gets farther away from the actual source. Okay, so let's just take this and let's open this up a little bit. It makes it a little wider. Maybe we can even take this and move it out like that a little bit. Okay, so there's our shadow. Now, I'm going to hit my Enter key to accept that. That's just my basic shadow. That's the starting point. So now, there's a couple of things that happen to a shadow, to a real shadow. Number one, as it gets farther away from the source, it gets lighter. How do we do that? Well, basically all we really need to do here is we come up and we make an adjustment layer, and in this way, let's just go to Levels. And I'm going to take my black slider and I'm going to move it over to the right. Well, it's making things a little bit darker. I don't want to do that. Let's take our white slider and move it over to the right. And you can see that our shadow is getting lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, there. Now, what I need to do also here is I need to make this shadow so that it doesn't get light uniformly, because a real shadow is going to get lighter the farther away it is from the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my layer mask here. I'm going to come up here to the gradient tool, and I'm going to select my gradient tool. I just want a black to white gradient, and I just clicked on that. So I have a black to white gradient, and actually this is the third box from the left. Let's say OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw on this image from the bottom to the top, just like that. And look what happens with my gradient. You can see it's darker at the bottom than it is at the top. Now, what I can do is, it's still pretty dark. Let's go in here and let's change this drop shadow. See, the drop shadow came out in multiply mode because that's the way drop shadows work. They're in multiply mode. So let's take a look at this and see what happens if we put it in normal mode. Well, not a lot of change there, but what I do want to do is I want to come back into here and let's make this a little bit lighter. There we go, just like that. Okay, so it's beginning to look like a shadow now, except a real shadow gets more blurred or more diffused as you move away from the source. So how do we do that? Well, we can do that really easily just by putting a Gaussian blur filter onto the image. But wait, I don't want to do it. Well, first of all, I don't want to do it on the levels layer. But when I come down here and highlight my bottle layer, the way that I really want to do it is I want to make this a smart object. So I'm just going to right click over here on the shadow and right click on the shadow, and I'm going to say convert to smart object. There we go. And now I'm going to add a smart filter to that. Well, why did I go and make it a smart object? Because I may not like the way the filter looks the first time, and I can always go back and modify a smart filter. So here we go. Let's make it a little bit sharper here. Okay, or we can bring it out and make it even more diffused. That's a little too much. There we go, just like that. All right. And there we are. But if we turn off our layer here, we can see that it's uniform all the way out. So how do we make it so that it's sharper at the base than it is at the top of the bottle? Well, that's easy. We go in here to our mask inside the smart filters. We've already got our gradient tool selected, and we just go down here and we just draw a line from top to somewhere up in here like that. And you can see, actually, let's go like that. Well, let's see, maybe bring it, there we go. Okay, so now you can see here that the shadow is actually sharper at the base of the bottle than it is up here at the top, and the glass is actually sharper at the base than it is at the top of the glass, but the top of the glass is still pretty close to the glass, so that's not going to get as blurred as the top. Now we'll put our diffuser back on so that our shadow goes like that. And there we are. But wait, you say, if I were doing this in a real photograph, wouldn't that shadow be in color? Wouldn't it have some of the characteristics of the bottle itself? Because actually the light is coming through the bottle. I mean, it's a translucent bottle. If the bottle were totally opaque, yeah, this is what it would look like. Okay, let's fix that. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to drag a copy of my bottle and glass layer. So the way I'm going to do that is hold down my Alt or Option key and just click and drag that down below the levels 1. And now I'm going to go in and, well, first of all, let's just turn off the original drop shadow. Now let's go in to this bottle and glass copy. We'll come back over here to the Edit menu. We'll go down to Transform again, and we'll select the Distort. And we'll take this and we'll bring this down like this. There we go. Just bring that in like that. And now we'll come over to the Edit menu again. We'll go back to Transform, and we'll get Perspective. And we'll just pull this out like this, and pull this out a little bit more like that. And let's go back in here to Distort. And then we can just bring the bottle out a little bit more like that. There we go. Okay. And now we'll accept that. Okay, so now you can see that the bottle is getting lighter as it goes out, and we may even want to make it lighter, but we'll worry about that in a second. The next thing that we see here is that we want to put this smart filter for the Gaussian blur on here. We want to put a filter on here for a Gaussian blur. So what I can do here is I just turned on the bottle and glass, the original drop shadow, and you can see it is different than the one we have right now. But what I want to do here is I want to make this bottle and glass copy. I want to make that a smart object. So I'm going to convert that layer to a smart object. And now I can take this smart filter and just holding down my Alt or Option key, I can drag it up to the top. And you can see that, whoops, I guess I didn't do that quite correctly here. What I want to do is hold the Option key down. There we go, because I didn't want to destroy it on the other. There we go. You do it on the word smart filters. So then you can see that this has been changed a little bit here. So it's blurry at the top, and it's sharp at the bottom, and it's also lighter at the top than at the bottom. So what I can do now is if I want to try to match these two bottles up, now all I really do is I turned on the bottom layer. Now I'm going to go to the top layer, and I'm going to go back in to free transform that again. So I go to Edit, I go to Transform, and I go to Distort. Smart filters will be turned off. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and bring this up like that, and then I'm going to come in and just try to match it a little bit. We'll go to the perspective, and we'll maybe bring the perspective in just a little bit like this. There. Okay, and now we accept that, and now we have our drop shadow. Now this may still be a little bit too intense, too dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my opacity. Well, first, before I take my opacity, remember the original drop shadow was in multiply mode. So let's take this to multiply, see if that makes any change. No, not really. So let's go ahead and just bring the opacity down a little bit like that. So now you can see that we can make a color drop shadow, or we can make a black and white, or if they really match up together, then we can put the two together. And let's come down and let's bring the opacity down on the shadow there. So with the combination of the two shadows, we actually look like we have a real shadow.